the White Devil, the Beast of Chicago, the modern Bluebeard. H. Holmes was the first documented serial killer in America. He was known for elaborate insurance scams, corpse theft, eclectic property ownership, and a murder castle stationed in the heart of Chicago. H. Holmes was born as Herman Webster Mudgett on May 16, 1861. He was raised in Gilmanton, New Hampshire as the third son to Levi Mudgett and Theodate Price. Growing up, Herman and his siblings were subjected to abuse from both parents, but mainly their father, who was a violent alcoholic. They were also a devout Methodist family. Despite his upbringing, Herman was an extremely intelligent child who expressed a large interest in medicine. Not despite his upbringing, he practiced his interest by performing surgeries on animals. Herman attended Gilmanton Academy as a youngster. He was an extremely intelligent child who was bullied for being advanced beyond his peers because it's not cool to be smart, obvi. In one instance, his classmates forced him to get touchy with a real human skeleton in the science department. Initially terrified, Herman grew to enjoy the experience a little too much and felt fascinated by touching the cadaver. This strengthened his interest in anatomy and gave him a new obsession to chew on: death. By 1882, Herman was off to college in Vermont. Though he only spent a year there, it's noted that while in Vermont he studied under Nahum White, a known advocate for human dissection. After that year, he left and transferred to the University of Michigan's Department of Medicine and Surgery. He worked in the anatomy lab under Professor Will Herdman and eventually under the head of the department. A few years later, Herman was actually accused of murder but denied these claims by saying, "I'm just a fraud," and admitted to stealing bodies several times from the anatomy labs to defraud life insurance companies. That is true. He did do that. During med school, before his transfer to Michigan, Herman spent some time back in New Hampshire, presumably gaining experience in the conning business. There, he met and married his first wife, Clara Lovering. Some accounts state that he was physically abusive toward her, which isn't necessarily proven, but definitely not doubted. They went on to have one son together, Robert Lovering. Not much is known about Clara and Robert. It's safe to assume that they lived a normal, private life without him after he abandoned them in less than a year of marriage. Clara is not the only marriage Herman was up to. During his travels over the next few years, he would marry 2 more women without ever actually divorcing the one before. So my guy was sporting sister wives for like a year. He had a daughter with his second wife, Myrta Belknap. Myrta and their daughter, Lucy Theodate Holmes, were also abandoned by him and lived long after his execution. Lucy went on to become a school teacher and chose to keep her last name Holmes, despite knowing it wasn't her father's real name. Allegedly, Myrta also kept the last name out of love for her husband. After leaving Myrta, Hermie had a mistress/accomplice, Minnie Williams, who he claimed to be his wife in order to seize her assets. Unfortunately, Minnie and her sister would eventually be 2 of Holmes' confirmed victims. Lastly, he married Georgiana Yoke, I think I said that right, whom he had no children with, and nothing was really notable about that marriage except the fact that she was unknowingly a sister wife, and also lived with his dead best friend's children for a while, allegedly. After graduating college with mediocre performance and abandoning Clara, Herman moved to Chicago and adopted the pseudonym H. Holmes. There, he picked up a job at a pharmacy, which he eventually owned and operated himself. He was speculated to have murdered the original owner, but that has since been debunked. It's much more likely that he got close to the original owner in order for the store to be left to him. He purchased an empty lot directly across the street from the pharmacy, where he built his famous 3-story murder castle. The ground floor was a drugstore, the second floor was apartments for long-term rent, and the third floor was supposed to be a hotel, but was never furnished or made livable. This is where many of the murder castle theories stem from, as many women who stayed in his building were reported missing. While it's very likely that Holmes did murder these women, the hotel area itself was just extra space he used to store stolen goods, which he had a lot of. I'll offer more insight on that later. Now, the part that you've been waiting for. Random disclaimer! Listen. Many accounts of Holmes's crimes have been fabricated by the press. Because he was the first known serial killer in America, ever documented, every single newspaper in Chicago at the time was scrambling to make money off of the story, causing many instances of yellow journalism surrounding his case. As you listen, use your best judgment, as it gets quite difficult to discern the truth from the media's creative liberties. They said that the castle was filled with traps. A labyrinth of hidden rooms, trapdoors, and normal doors that lead to a brick wall. Holmes's 3rd-story hotel was his ultimate way of luring you in and trapping you. He offered lodging to tourists staying in the city for the 1893 Columbian Exposition, a 6-month-long fair celebrating the anniversary of Columbus's landing in America. Unassuming tourists would pay for extended stay, and when they'd come upstairs to check into their room, they'd be met with an endless maze created solely to torture them. A floor plan was published in the World newspaper, detailing a vault, a crematorium, and even a grave filled with bones, all located on the 3rd floor. Later on, when captured by police, Holmes would actually claim that his favorite way to murder people was through suffocation, which led to many exaggerations of gas chambers hidden in the hotel. He also claimed to use starvation and burning alive as preferred methods of killing. Holmes was a charming, deceptive killer. It was incredibly easy for him to manipulate others into getting what he wanted, which is what made him such a good con artist as well. Or maybe being a con artist made him more manipulative, like the chicken and the egg. It is believed that Holmes murdered around 200 people in total. In custody, he only confessed to 27 murders, but the weird thing is that the majority of the victims he listed were very much alive. Only 11 people have ever been definitely confirmed as victims of H.H. Holmes. Many presumed victims have also been connected to Holmes. Another mistress Holmes had, Julia Smith, was a known accomplice. On Christmas of 1891, Julia and her 5-year-old daughter Pearl vanished mysteriously. It is safe to assume that Holmes murdered them. 23-year-old Emmeline Seagrant, I think, was a secretary in Holmes's building who dated him for a while but lost interest. Suddenly she disappeared to marry a man named Robert Phelps. Interesting. Lastly, 24-year-old Minnie Williams, the mistress mentioned earlier that he was stealing from. They lived together for a while, and when Minnie's younger sister Anna came to visit on Christmas of 1891, you guessed it, the pair mysteriously vanished. We can assume that all of these people have been murdered by Holmes, as the timeframes line up almost perfectly, and some do have evidence that, very highly suggests it. Many other claims have been made of numerous victims and witnesses. Holmes has 11 absolute kills to his name: Julia Smith and Pearl Smith, Emmeline Seagrand, Emily Van Tassel, Minnie Williams, her sister Nanny Williams, Charles Milford Cole, and most importantly, Benjamin, Alice, Nellie, and Howard Peitzel. The Peitzel murders would soon become the evidence needed to capture Holmes for good. Benjamin Peitzel was Holmes's close friend and partner in crime. The two met in a chemical bank and became besties for the resties. They traveled around and kept in touch for about a year, and Holmes even knew Benjamin's family personally. During his first detainment in St. Louis for selling mortgaged goods, Holmes heard about an insurance scam that he just had to go back home and tell Benjamin about. Using newfound inspiration, they concocted a plan to take out a $10,000 policy in Benjamin's fake name, B.F. Perry, and then fake B.F. Perry's death so that Holmes could come in and claim the money for them to split. The pair set out to steal a cadaver that looked like Benjamin to bring in as a decoy. For some reason, Holmes decided then that a fake wasn't going to cut it. He needed the real body of Benjamin Peitzel. Holmes murdered Peitzel by knocking him unconscious with chloroform, then setting his body on fire. Later in custody, Holmes would claim that he burned Peitzel alive after using the chloroform, but forensic evidence showed that the chloroform was administered after death, presumably to fake Benjamin's suicide if Holmes was accused of his murder. He then manipulated Benjamin's unassuming wife, Carrie Alice Canning, into thinking that Benjamin had fled detection and was living under the radar in London. Carrie gave Holmes custody of 3 of her 5 children: 13-year-old Alice, 9-year-old Nellie, and 7-year-old Howard. By then, it was 1894, and authorities had been aware of and trying to track Holmes for quite some time. As he traveled around New England with the Peitzel children, he was evading both Carrie Canning and the police. He was living with his 3rd wife, Georgiana Yoke, who was somehow unaware of the entire Peitzel debacle. It is unclear what the kids' living situation was with him while they were still alive, though, as he did have custody of them at this point. Whether he claimed that they were his, or if they were kept somewhere else, I wasn't able to find anything on that. The 3 Peitzel children were among Holmes's confessed victims. He admitted to authorities that he forced Nellie and Alice into a trunk, drilling a hole in the lid and adding a gas line. Both girls died of suffocation. They were found buried in the cellar of Holmes's former rental in Toronto, Canada. Authorities were then led to Indianapolis, where they discovered Howard's teeth and bone fragments in the chimney. He was reportedly killed by drugs, we don't know what kind, then dismembered and burned. Holmes was finally arrested in Boston on November 17, 1894, after being tracked by detectives all the way from Philadelphia. He was found through a warrant sent by Texas, where he was wanted for horse theft. The Peitzel girls were discovered in July 1895 by detectives following Holmes, which led to an entire string of circumstantial evidence, including items from Julia and Pearl Connor and Minnie Williams. However, the only clear evidence they could use to convict him was that of Benjamin Peitzel and his children. Holmes was put to trial in October of 1895 and was quickly sentenced to death for the murder of Peitzel and his children. It was only after his conviction that he confessed to the 27 murders and what he did to some specific victims. This evidence further aided many investigations. H. Holmes was hanged on May 7, 1896. He remained calm throughout and didn't show any signs of anxiety. However, he did ask to be buried 10 feet deep so as to prevent body snatchers taking his and using it for dissection. Sounds like projection, if you're asking me. Final thoughts. If I had to classify H. Holmes, I would definitely say he's an organized killer. He planned many of his crimes, and while he failed just as many times as he succeeded, he still succeeded a fair bit. It's kind of hard to tell exactly why he murdered because there's so many factors. His childhood trauma definitely was a factor, as well as his childhood dream of dissecting people. If I had to categorize him, I would say he was definitely an expert manipulator, as that's how he got away with many of his crimes, teetering between hedonistic and power-oriented. I do believe his motivations also stemmed from needing to cover up his many frauds. All in all, it's kind of a wild ride. Good night.